He was a hardened officer who struck his canine partner for disobeying orders. But when disaster struck, the same loyal dog risked everything to save his life. What unfolded next was a powerful story of regret, redemption, and a bond that even death couldn't break. He wasn't always like that. Not the man, not the dog. But war changes things. It changes men. And sometimes it breaks dogs in ways no one talks about. Sergeant Mike Delaney had served 12 years in the force, half of them in K-9 units. By the time he was paired with Ace, a German shepherd with amber eyes and a jaw like iron, he had already buried 2 partners. "The dog is a tool," Mike always said. "You use it, you don't get attached." But Ace was different, not in the way he followed commands, though he did that flawlessly, or how he could sniff out a buried landmine from 30 yards. It was something quieter, something that showed in the way Ace would wait outside the barracks every night, even when Mike tried to lock him out. In the way he watched Mike when he wasn't being watched. There was loyalty there. Unasked for. Unreturned. The mission that changed everything came without warning. Intelligence claimed there was a hidden weapons cache buried beneath a burned-out compound. Mike and Ace were sent in ahead of the squad. Standard protocol. The dog sweeps the area first. But that day, Ace hesitated. He stood still just beyond the compound's doorway, his ears flat, tail low, eyes locked on the darkness inside. Mike barked the command again. "Search!" But Ace didn't budge. Frustration sparked like a match in Mike's gut. They had trained for this. This was what Ace was bred to do. Another order, another pause, and then Mike snapped. The strike was quick, sharp, a blow across the muzzle. Ace yelped, stumbled back, then looked at Mike like he couldn't understand what had just happened. That look lingered longer than the sting. "You're done," Mike growled. "You disobey, you're a liability." He called in the backup unit and pulled Ace from the field that day. 2 days later, the compound exploded, rigged with a pressure bomb buried deep beneath the flooring. If Ace had gone in, he'd have died. So would Mike. But none of that mattered then. All Mike saw was defiance. He filed the report, requested reassignment for the dog, and left Ace caged in the military kennel, out of sight, out of mind, except he wasn't. Not really. Nights got colder, not because of the desert wind, but because of the silence. No paw steps beside his bunk, no soft breathing in the dark. And when he finally got word that Ace had been transferred out of the unit, something inside Mike went quiet, too. Months passed. The squad rotated stateside. Mike followed. He spent his days in the office, behind paper and protocol. He didn't ask where Ace had gone. Didn't want to know. But sometimes he dreamed of that look. Those amber eyes filled not with fear, but confusion. And that was worse. Then came the hurricane. A storm unlike any they'd seen before hit the Gulf Coast with the force of a freight train. Mike, reassigned to a FEMA rescue unit, was sent to assist in flood zones, damaged homes, missing persons, collapsed buildings. The devastation stretched for miles. But it was the call on the 3rd day that changed everything. "Collapsed school?" the voice on the radio crackled. "Kids possibly trapped in the lower levels? No power? Debris unstable." Mike arrived to find the rescue team already spread thin. A familiar handler approached, gear soaked, eyes wide. "We've got a dog sweeping inside," he said, pointing toward the shattered entrance. Mike nodded, watching as the dog emerged from the shadows, soaked and shaking, but familiar. Too familiar. "Ace?" The words slipped from Mike's lips like a breath he hadn't meant to take. The handler looked at him. "Yeah, that's Ace. Best we've got." Mike stepped forward. Ace stood still, staring, tail low, not tucked in fear, but waiting, recognizing. They said dogs don't forget. They were right. But this wasn't a reunion, not yet. The handler called Ace back to task, and the shepherd turned without hesitation, heading back into the rubble. "I'm going in with him," Mike said. The handler raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Mike nodded, already pulling on gear. "I know him. He'll listen to me." Inside, the air was thick with dust and soaked insulation. Beams creaked above, and water sloshed around their ankles. Mike moved behind Ace as the dog pushed forward through the darkened hallway. Suddenly, Ace stopped. His body stiffened, nose twitching. He turned left sharply, pawed at a pile of crumbled lockers. Mike dropped beside him, shining a light. A sound. Faint. Muffled. A child's voice? Mike shouted back down the hall. "Over here! We've got something!" Rescuers moved in. The hours blurred. They pulled out 3 children, huddled beneath a collapsed stairwell. Alive. Barely scratched. And Ace never left their side. When they brought the kids out on stretchers, the parents wept. Reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs popped. But Mike couldn't stop staring at the dog, soaked, tired, muddy, and still looking at him. Later that night, when the cameras were gone, Mike found him curled beside a generator, eyes half closed. He sat down beside him, didn't say a word. Ace looked up. Mike whispered, "You knew that day, didn't you? You were trying to save me." Ace nudged his hand, and Mike cried. The storm may have passed, but inside Mike, the winds still howled. They offered him a hotel room that night, warm and dry, with working plumbing and an actual bed. But he declined. He stayed with the emergency team in a makeshift camp next to the flooded elementary school. Most of the men and women slept in cots under a wide FEMA tent. Ace? He slept curled up beside Mike, just like he used to in the barracks, long ago before the compound, before the slap, before everything changed. Mike didn't sleep much. Instead, he watched Ace in the low light, his breathing steady, his legs twitching in a dream. He wondered what haunted a dog's sleep. Did Ace dream of the compound too? Of the pain? Of being left behind? He reached out, fingers grazing the thick fur at Ace's neck. Ace stirred but didn't pull away. It was permission. Maybe even forgiveness. The next morning brought more chaos. A bridge had collapsed 15 miles west, stranding a dozen families. Mike joined the convoy. He wasn't officially recertified for field work with a K9 anymore, but no one questioned it. Not after yesterday. Not after what Ace had done. They were assigned to check a suburban cul-de-sac, half swallowed by the river surge. Rooflines peeked from the water like sinking ships. A woman flagged them down, her voice ragged, panic in her eyes. "My dad, he wouldn't leave. Said he could handle it. I haven't heard from him in 2 days." Mike didn't wait. He and Ace moved in, wading through knee-deep water into the skeleton of a once beautiful home. Furniture floated like driftwood. The walls were slick with mold. The smell of rot clung to everything. "Ace, search," Mike whispered, low and steady. The dog sprang into motion, nose down, weaving through wreckage with practiced precision. They checked the kitchen, the living room, the collapsed staircase. Nothing. Then a sound, software muffled, the faintest thump. Ace froze, ears high. He bolted toward the back room, paws slapping water. Mike followed close behind. The door was jammed. Mike threw his shoulder into it once, twice, then it gave. Inside, they found an old man wedged between a fallen bookcase and a broken table, barely conscious. "Help's here," Mike said, falling to his knees. "We've got you." Ace stood guard while Mike radioed for medics, barking once to guide them in when they arrived. It wasn't until hours later, after the man had been airlifted out and the street finally cleared, that one of the young FEMA officers approached Mike. "You trained him yourself?" she asked, eyes wide as she watched Ace drink from a puddle. Mike nodded slowly. "We were partners." She frowned. "You mean are, right?" Mike opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at Ace, that familiar calm, that quiet, unwavering focus. "Yeah," Mike said. "We are." The next few days blurred into one mission after another. Missing kids, trapped seniors, stray animals. Everywhere they went, Ace led the way. Sometimes it was just his bark that brought attention. Sometimes it was the way he stopped cold, turned his head, and stared into the silence, like he could hear heartbeats through rubble. And through it all, Mike walked beside him, quieter now. Gentler. Every pat on the head was an apology. Every tossed stick during downtime was a thank you. But redemption doesn't come easy. One night, near the edge of the flood zone, they found a collapsed parking garage. Word was a city bus had taken shelter there before the waters rose, and no one had seen it come out. Mike and Ace joined the recovery team. It was a dangerous operation. Twisted steel, unstable concrete, water sloshing at their boots. They stepped inside. "Ace, go slow," Mike warned. The building groaned above them. The smell hit first. Gasoline, oil, and something worse. Then they heard it. A whimper. "Ace, alert!" The shepherd stood stiff, tail straight, staring down a corridor made from broken support beams and half-submerged cars. He turned his head. Then, he bolted. "Ace!" Mike yelled. "Wait!" But the dog didn't stop. Mike chased after him, heart hammering. "Not again," he muttered. "Not again, not again." He found Ace 40 feet in, standing beside a crushed van. Inside was a boy, maybe 9, soaked and pale, barely breathing. He was pinned, but alive. Mike keyed his radio, but before he could speak, the ceiling above creaked. Then it gave. A slab of concrete, massive and slick, fell toward them. Mike dove, yanked the boy out of reach, and watched as Ace leapt toward him, shoving his body against Mike's back. The slab hit. Everything went black. Pain. It was the first thing Mike felt. A deep, grinding pressure in his ribs. His eyes fluttered open to a world of dust and blurred light. Something warm and wet dripped down his temple. He blinked slowly. The boy was crying, curled tightly in Mike's arms. Alive? But where was Ace? Mike croaked, barely audible. He tried to move, but something heavy pinned his leg. The slab had caught part of the van, shielding them from the full collapse. A miracle, some might say. But Mike knew the real reason he was still breathing. "Ace," he said louder now, panicked. He pulled himself free, dragging his body toward the rubble. The boy clung to him, but Mike peeled away, crawling through glass and shattered concrete. Then he saw the fur. Ace was half buried beneath the debris. His chest moved, shallow and slow. "Number no. Mike cleared the rubble with shaking hands. His body screamed with every movement, but he didn't stop. He uncovered Ace's head, his shoulder, then the twisted back leg. Blood. Too much of it. Ace opened one eye. "You idiot," Mike whispered, tears slipping down his face. "Why'd you do that? You should have run." Ace exhaled through his nose, weak, but steady. His ears twitched at the sound of Mike's voice. Mike shouted for help. His radio was broken, crushed in the fall. But others must have heard. They had to. He laid beside Ace, pressing a hand against his side, feeling the fragile rhythm of the dog's heart. "You stay with me. You hear me, soldier? That's an order." Sirens, distant at first, then closer. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Voices called out. Medics poured into the wreckage. They took the boy first, alive thanks to Ace. Then they reached for Mike. "I'm fine," he growled. "Help the dog." They hesitated. One medic leaned closer. "He's a K9?" Mike nodded. "He's my K9. They worked fast, splinting the leg, wrapping the wounds, giving Ace oxygen through a special K9 mask. Mike never left his side. When they were finally loaded into the truck, Mike rode with Ace in the back, cradling his massive head in his lap. He didn't speak. He just kept one hand on the fur and the other clutching Ace's paw. At the vet trauma center, they took Ace into surgery. Mike stood outside the glass doors, fists clenched, eyes locked on the red light over the operating room. Hours passed. A nurse brought him coffee. Another offered to call someone. Mike declined both. Finally, a vet stepped out. "He made it," she said. "It was close, but he pulled through." Mike's knees buckled. He sat on the cold floor, breath caught between a sob and a prayer. Ace spent the next week recovering. Metal pins in his leg, bandages across his side. But every day he grew stronger. And every day Mike was there, sleeping in a chair, feeding him by hand, talking to him like they were back in the barracks. "You saved me," Mike said once, softly, as Ace rested his head in his lap again. "After everything I did to you, you still saved me." Ace blinked slowly, then nudged Mike's hand with his nose. The moment cracked something open inside him. Mike broke down. All the guilt, all the anger, all the shame he'd buried since the compound, since that slap, since walking away from the one being who had never turned his back on him, it all came pouring out. And Ace stayed right there, steady, unmoving, as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." Word spread quickly. A retired K9, injured saving his former handler, a man who once pushed everyone away, now found lying in rubble with a boy in one arm and his wounded dog in the other. The department reinstated Mike, not for service, but as a community liaison. They said people needed to hear their story. Mike didn't care about the speeches or the news crews. What he cared about was the second chance, for both of them. Ace went through months of therapy. The limp never fully went away, but he didn't seem to mind. Mike adjusted too, his own physical therapy a reminder of the price they'd both paid. But they had each other now. That's what mattered. One morning, Mike opened the door to find a group of kids from the local school standing on his porch. Their teacher stepped forward nervously. "We heard about what your dog did," she said. Would you mind bringing him to class sometime? Talk to the kids about bravery, about second chances?" Mike looked down at Ace. The shepherd sat tall, ears perked, eyes alert. He smiled. "We'd be honored." They visited every month after that. Mike spoke. Ace listened or dozed, and the kids adored him. Some brought drawings, others brought treats. One little girl asked if Ace could teach her how to be brave. Mike knelt beside her. "He already is," he said gently. "And so are you." But it wasn't all speeches and smiles. Sometimes, late at night, Mike still woke in a cold sweat. Memories of the compound, the yelling, the snap of that leash against fur. But every time he did, Ace was there, head resting on the side of the bed, warm eyes meeting his. And that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Mike took Ace for a walk through the fields behind his home. The wind was soft. The world was quiet. They stopped near the old oak tree. Mike knelt beside him. "You were never disobedient," he whispered. "You were just trying to do what was right. I see that now." Ace leaned into him. Mike buried his face in the thick fur and stayed there for a long, long time. The years that followed weren't perfect. Mike still struggled. There were days when the weight of what he'd done crept in like a fog, days when the memories were too loud, too vivid. But now, he didn't face them alone. Ace, his once disgraced partner, had become the center of a quiet storm of healing. Their story, told in newspapers, shared in school assemblies, and whispered between officers in locker rooms, had become a beacon for others lost in the dark. And not just others. Mike had changed. He volunteered now, at the animal shelter, at the VA hospital, even on the department's new mental health outreach team. He didn't speak in long sentences. He didn't know how to make speeches. But when he entered a room with Ace limping beside him, silence always followed, and hearts opened. "You're the guy who hit his dog," a boy once said, staring up at him with no malice, just curiosity. Mike had nodded. "I was. But he still likes you." Mike smiled. "Yeah, he does, and I'm working every day to deserve it." He never pretended it was easy. He never sugarcoated the damage he'd done, to Ace, to himself, to the bond they'd almost destroyed. But that was the thing about dogs, wasn't it? They didn't need you to be perfect. They just needed you to show up. Again and again, even when it was hard, especially then. Ace had his own kind of fame now. At the park, children would run to him with squeals of "Ace!" and hugs that made Mike flinch at first, until Ace's calm response soothed them both. Parents took photos. Veterans stopped to salute. And other officers, those who once whispered behind Mike's back, now nodded in respect. One summer afternoon, while helping at the shelter, Mike noticed a German Shepherd pup huddled in the corner of a kennel. He was shaking, refusing food. The note on the clipboard read, "Confiscated from abuse case. Aggressive. Do not approach." But Mike saw something else in the dog's eyes. He sat near the kennel for an hour, saying nothing. Then another hour the next day. On the third, he brought Ace. The pup growled, flattened against the wall. Ace didn't flinch. He lay down quietly in front of the gate, eyes calm, posture non-threatening. On the fifth day, the pup crept closer. By the seventh, he let Mike touch him. Mike named him Echo. It felt right, like a sound returning from the past, reshaped by distance. Training Echo took patience, more than Mike ever knew he had. But Ace helped. The old dog became mentor to the young one, teaching without words, modeling trust, showing Echo that the world wasn't only pain and punishment. Echo bonded deeply with Ace first, and then with Mike. He never completely lost his fear. Certain noises still made him cower, but like Mike, he kept showing up. One evening, after months of slow progress, Echo crawled onto Mike's bed during a thunderstorm. He tucked himself against Mike's side, shivering. Mike didn't move. Ace, ever steady, lay at the foot of the bed, eyes open, watching. "You're safe now," Mike whispered to Echo. "No one's going to hurt you again." He wasn't sure who he was saying it to, Echo or himself. Some days, Mike looked at Ace and still saw the scars, the thin line along his side, the slight hitch in his gait. But he also saw something stronger, a quiet dignity. A dog who had been broken and still chose to love. It humbled him. One weekend, they were invited to a K9 graduation ceremony. Ace would be honored with a lifetime achievement plaque, and Mike asked permission to bring Echo along. At the event, surrounded by handlers and dogs in perfect formation, Mike felt a familiar shame prick at his chest. Ace didn't belong to this polished world anymore. He was graying, slower now. His days of chasing suspects were over. But when his name was called, the crowd rose to their feet. Mike walked him slowly to the stage. The chief, a man who had once nearly ended Mike's career, handed him the plaque. For valor, for sacrifice, for forgiveness. Mike said nothing. He simply looked at Ace, then nodded. Afterward, a young handler approached him. Her K9 stood rigid beside her, ears twitching. "I read your story," she said quietly. "I was hard on my dog in the beginning. Too hard. I thought that's what it took to earn respect." Mike met her eyes. "It takes listening, and letting them lead sometimes, even when it scares you." She nodded, tearing up. "Thank you." That night, Mike stood at the back of the ceremony hall. Echo lay curled at his feet. Ace sat beside him, watching the lights, unmoving. "You saved more than me," Mike whispered. "You saved 100 dogs who'll never know your name, and people too." Ace didn't move. He didn't need to. He already knew. Later that week, while walking through the field near their home, Ace stopped. He sniffed the air, then sat down, staring at the horizon. Mike followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just wind and sky. But something about the moment froze Mike in place. Ace didn't look back, just sat still, regal, quiet. His ears twitched, his eyes closed. Mike knelt beside him. "You okay, buddy?" Ace leaned his weight gently into him. Then he lay down in the grass. Mike stayed there, hand resting on his side, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. The day Ace stopped moving was the kind of day Mike had always feared. They'd been in the field, just like old times. Ace, limping but steady, by his side, the sun dipping low in the sky. Mike had been working with Echo on a few commands, and Ace had been watching them quietly, as though the old dog knew the young one needed guidance. But then, without warning, Ace stopped. It wasn't sudden, not exactly. More like he had been slowing down for weeks, maybe even months. But Mike hadn't wanted to see it. He had clung to the hope that Ace would always be there, always be by his side, always be the brave, invincible K9 who had saved him and countless others. It was a cold slap to reality when Ace looked up at Mike with tired eyes, then lowered his head and lay down on the grass, slow and deliberate. Mike kneeled beside him, his heart in his throat. "Ace? Buddy?" No response. He reached down and touched the old dog's fur, warm but thinner now than it had been, the once strong chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, but much slower than it used to. "Ace, come on, let's go home," Mike urged, his voice tight. "We'll get you some water, a treat. Come on." But Ace didn't get up. Mike's hands trembled as he checked the dog's pulse, the soft thump of it under his fingers reminding him of how much time had passed since they'd first found each other, back when Mike had been nothing but a broken man, and Ace had been nothing but a misunderstood, misjudged animal. "You're not done yet, Ace," Mike whispered, his voice breaking. "You can't be." But Ace didn't respond. He didn't move. Mike sat there with him for what felt like hours, the night air growing colder, the stars starting to poke through the dark sky above them. Ace's breathing was slower now, the rise and fall of his chest more shallow. Mike pressed his forehead against the old dog's, feeling the weight of the years between them. "I'm so sorry," Mike murmured, tears starting to blur his vision. "I didn't know what I had. I didn't know what you'd become, what you did for me." He could feel the weight of it all now. The regret, the guilt, all the years of mistakes, all the times he had hurt Ace with his anger, his impatience. And yet here Ace was, still by his side, still loyal, still waiting for Mike to be the man Ace believed he could be. "Please don't go," Mike whispered, pressing harder against him. "You're my best friend, Ace. Don't leave me." For a moment he thought he could feel Ace's heart give a little surge, like the old dog was trying, just for a second, to rise, to keep going. But it wasn't enough. Ace's eyes closed slowly, and Mike felt the shift. He held his breath, waiting, hoping for something, anything to change, but nothing did. The wind rustled the leaves around them, and Mike felt a hollow emptiness settle in his chest. Ace was gone. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. Mike wasn't ready to say goodbye. But life doesn't care about fairness. It doesn't give us the time we think we need. Ace had given Mike everything he had, his loyalty, his forgiveness, his love. In return, Mike had given him his best, and sometimes that was enough. And sometimes it wasn't. Mike sat beside him for what felt like forever, tears falling freely now, his hand resting on Ace's head, just as it had so many times before. Eventually, he rose to his feet. Echo was sitting nearby, watching them both, his expression calm but mournful. He had known what was happening, even if Mike hadn't wanted to face it. It was time. Mike took a deep breath, wiped his eyes, and whispered one last goodbye to the dog who had saved him, again and again, when no one else had. Later, when the sun came up, Mike called the shelter. He needed help with Ace's body. He couldn't do this alone. But it wasn't just Ace's body he needed help with. He needed help with the hole in his heart, the one that Ace had filled without ever asking for anything in return. The vet came by with a truck, but when they took Ace's body, Mike stood there alone in the field, his hands hanging at his sides, unsure of what to do next. He looked down at the ground where Ace had lain, where they had shared their last moment together. It was hard, the hardest thing he had ever done. But in the quiet that followed, something changed. The grief didn't go away, but something deep inside him settled. A kind of peace, but not in the way he'd imagined. It wasn't a calm, easy feeling. It was raw and real. A peace born out of knowing he'd done everything he could, that he had loved Ace the best he could. And now it was Echo's turn. Echo was already there, sitting beside him, head tilted slightly to the side, as if waiting for Mike to lead the way forward. "Come on, buddy," Mike said, his voice rough. "Let's go home." It was a new chapter, not one that Mike had expected, but one that had been waiting for him all along. And with Echo by his side, Mike knew he'd be okay. He wasn't the same man he had been when he found Ace. He wasn't the same man who had made mistakes, who had been lost and angry. He had learned something from Ace, a lesson in forgiveness, in loyalty, in the power of second chances. And he'd carry that with him, always. The next morning, Mike walked with Echo to the park. He wasn't sure where the path would lead, but as they walked side by side, he felt something like hope, like the beginning of something new. He wasn't alone anymore. He never would be again.